Have you ever been on a coaster that turned out to be way tamer than you expected it to be? It's fair to say that the UK contains many intimidating looking coasters, from Hyperia to Octonaut's Roller Coaster Adventure. But today I'm going to highlight the coasters which aren't as intense or scary as they initially appeared to be off-ride. So let's start off with probably the most obvious coaster on this list, the Swarm. Although this coaster appears fairly intimidating from off-ride with its height of 127 feet, top speed of 59 miles an hour and apocalyptic near-miss effects, the coaster itself runs very gracefully. The Swarm doesn't whip through its elements, it instead flows from one section to another with no rattle whatsoever. Saw the ride. Take notes. And from my personal experience, the near-miss elements are more of a fun addition to the ride experience, rather than something to be scared of, as in reality you don't really get close to anything. It's all an illusion. Wow! Let's head up to Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Pleasure Beach Resort, for our next coaster on our list, which is Icon. Someone who hasn't been on a Mack launch coaster might expect Icon to ride similar to an Intamin Blitz coaster like Maverick at Cedar Point, which has a punchy launch and forceful whippy inversions. But Icon really doesn't ride that way. Similar to the Swarm, it is a fairly smooth and more graceful coaster which isn't overly forceful. And the launches, well, I think my nan's Fiat Panda could rival them. But that's not to say that it isn't one of the UK's best coasters, as the layout is awesome. Intertwining with Icon is a Big One, which I also believe is a coaster whose bark is worse than their bite. The Big One is a very imposing coaster, with it standing 213 feet above the park, not 235 feet from sea level. If Flying Fish was measured from sea level, it would probably be the height of King Dakar. Oh wait. Anyway, the Big One from off-ride looks like a pretty intense coaster, and that certainly is the case with the first drop, which is very janky and intense. However, the rest of the layout is a bit of a rattly monorail filled with slow banked turns and airtime hills which are too drawn out to get Hyperia level airtime. That is not to say though that the Big One shouldn't be praised for its iconic status. Be sure to subscribe and follow my Instagram for more videos just like this, but let's travel down to Alton Towers, home to multiple coasters which fit under this category, some of which may surprise you. Starting with the most obvious one in my opinion is 13 due to its marketing campaign. On the lead up to this coaster's opening, Alton Towers promoted 13 as, wait for it, the scariest ride in the world. So there was definitely a lot of hype on the lead up to its opening. However, after its opening, people very quickly started to realise that 13 was nothing more than a very fun family coaster with a, spoiler alert, drop track. Someone even described the coaster as having more trims than a men's barber shop on a Saturday morning. As I was already aware of it being a family coaster before riding it, its lack of intensity didn't bother me, and I actually find it a brilliant coaster with a surprising amount of airtime. Now let's head over to X Sector to talk about the Smiler. I know, a shocker. On a surface level, the Smiler's back-to-back intertwining 14 inversions do appear very intimidating.
I don't get nervous, but I'm starting to get a bit shaky, you know what I mean?
Only enhanced by the creepy and unhinged theming and soundtrack. But I don't actually find the Smiler to be as intense of a coaster as Nemesis Reborn, despite it having way more inversions. Compared with Nemesis Reborn's layout, which is rapid from start to finish, the Smiler's inversions feel more drawn out, and the vertical lift till midway through the coaster helps to lower the intensity. Just a couple of meters away from the Smiler, we have Oblivion, which I also believe looks more intimidating than it actually is. This video is getting too controversial for my liking. I'll admit that the slow tilt over the edge of the drop is scary, however the actual drop is a lot of fun, offering some great floater airtime. The underground section and the coaster's bank up towards the surface go by fairly quickly, and before you know it, you're back on the coaster's mile-long brake run. And despite Oblivion nearly being 30 years old, it still remains buttery smooth. Old B&Ms, hey? Old B&Ms. Next we have Millenium at Fantasy Island. From off-ride, a theme park enthusiast who hasn't heard about the coaster might stare up at this gigantic 150-foot 3-inversion coaster and start making assumptions of it being rough, as it's an old Vekoma.
And I've got to say, in all honesty, it's the biggest piece of dog.
However, Millenium is quite the opposite. The coaster is similar to the Swarm in its smoothness, and the layout is very drawn out, which takes away from the intensity. Millenium is a great example of why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Kumali at Flamingo Land is another older Vekoma coaster which, due to its ride model as an SLC, has negative connotations of it being overly intense and rough. Though like Millenium, that word's too hard to say.
Millenium.
There we go. It rides much smoother and more gracefully than what you'd expect. Let's end the video by heading over to Chessington World of Adventures with Vampire. Now this coaster is similar to the Smiler in the sense that the theming contributes to the intimidating nature. For children the station can be quite frightening. I remember when I was a kid being scared of Marcel the Vampire. Honestly, what an op. In terms of the coaster itself, the fact you can't see the full layout also adds to the fear factor for first time riders. Though, in contrast with the spooky theming, the coaster is just a fun family coaster with only a couple of fast sections, such as the dive into the tunnel. It's just flying through the trees. So that's my list of coasters whose bark is worse than their bite. Be sure to comment your list down below and subscribe for more videos just like this. See you in the next one.
Wow!